rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the first thing I heard. I was 29 years old, waking up in an intensive care unit after a 12-hour emergency surgery. My throat was dry, my body numb, but my mind was startlingly sharp. I reached for my phone. It buzzed with a notification, a social media post from my mother, Brenda. There she was, holding a champagne flute on a yacht in St. Bart's with my brother Jason and Aunt Linda. The caption read, "Celebrating freedom." They went on a luxury vacation while I was sliced open on an operating table. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. Have you ever sacrificed everything for someone only to have them turn their back on you the moment you needed them? Drop a comment and let me know how you handled it. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret or heartbreak, but there was only clinical clarity. I had been the silent investor in their version of family. For years, I wasn't just a daughter or a sister. I was the central bank. I paid the mortgage on the 4-bedroom townhouse they lived in. I handled the property taxes. I funded Jason's endless string of failed application development startups. I paid Aunt Linda's credit card debts when the collection agencies started calling. I was the reliable one. That is the trap of the reliable one. You are groomed from childhood to be the fixer. You are taught that your value in the family is directly proportional to your utility. If you solve the problems, if you write the checks, if you absorb the stress, then you earn your place at the table. I realized in that sterile hospital bed that my relationship with my family had never been based on love or mutual respect. It had been a subscription service with me footing the bill. I was the premium tier, providing unlimited access to my resources, my energy, and my peace of mind. And the moment my utility paused, the moment my physical body gave out and I became an inconvenience, they simply paused their subscription and flew to the Caribbean. I stared at the photo of them laughing in the sun. Anger wasn't loud this time. It was clinical. I didn't feel the urge to scream or throw my phone against the wall. I just opened my laptop and started looking at the balance sheet. Every dollar I had ever transferred, every debt I had cleared, every luxury I had subsidized, it was all there in black and white. They had extracted hundreds of thousands of dollars from me over the last 7 years. They had taken my youth, my early career bonuses, my stock options. I had rationalized it as family duty, but it was just systematic financial extraction. Now, the anesthesia was wearing off, and the fog of familial obligation was lifting with it. They weren't shocked by what they had done. They were just confident I would continue playing along. They assumed I would wake up, pay the medical bills, and go back to writing the checks that funded their vanity. But the girl who wrote those checks died on that operating table. The woman who woke up was a software architect, and I was about to dismantle the infrastructure I had built for them, brick by brick. My fingers moved over the keyboard with practiced precision. The first step was assessing the perimeter. I logged into my primary financial accounts. That was when I saw it, a pending transfer of $85,000. My annual performance bonus. Jason had bypassed my secondary security protocols. He had used the technical credentials I had foolishly trusted him with years ago to initiate a wire transfer to his offshore account. He timed it perfectly, knowing I would be unconscious and unable to approve or deny the alert. He wasn't just enjoying a vacation on my dime, he was actively looting my assets while I was fighting for my life. I waited until the second day, once the heavy anesthesia had faded and my mind was fully operational. I then initiated the ghosting protocol. I didn't panic. I just started clicking cancel. I locked every single credit card associated with my name. I logged into the banking portal and revoked all authorized user access for Brenda, Jason, and Linda. I changed every password, utilizing complex cryptographic keys that Jason's mediocre technical skills could never crack. Then, I turned my attention to my intellectual property. As a lead developer, I hold the patents and royalties to 3 major enterprise software solutions. I accessed my private servers and transferred all source code, administrative rights, and royalty routing protocols to a secure, encrypted Ghost account. I severed their digital lifelines with surgical precision. By 2:15 in the morning, their financial oxygen supply was permanently cut off. I picked up my phone and called Marcus. Marcus is an attorney in his late 40s, sharp, professional, and ethically unshakable. He had advised me on my software patents for years. He answered on the second ring. I told him I was in the hospital, and I told him what Jason had attempted to do. I instructed Marcus to run a comprehensive legal audit on all my assets, properties, and corporate entities. I wanted every vulnerability patched. I wanted an ironclad firewall between my wealth and my biological family. Marcus didn't offer empty sympathies. He understood the language of action. He told me he would have a preliminary injunction drafted by dawn. I hung up the phone and watched the digital confirmations roll in on my screen. Access denied. Transfer canceled. Account locked. Each notification was a brick in the wall I was building between us. They had relied on my emotional vulnerability to bypass my logic, but trauma has a funny way of burning away the emotional fog, leaving only cold, hard data. They were about to discover what happens when their silent investor forcefully liquidates her shares without warning. It took exactly 36 hours for the reality of their situation to pierce the tropical paradise of St. Bart. I was being transferred from the intensive care unit to a standard recovery room when my phone lit up with a barrage of notifications. Their credit cards were declining at the hotel restaurants. Their access to the digital wallets had vanished. The automated teller withdrawals were rejected. The golden goose had stopped laying. Brenda's reaction was swift, predictable, and highly calculated. She weaponized social media. She couldn't admit that her bankroll had cut her off, so she played the victim to force my compliance. Brenda posted a long, tearful manifesto on Facebook, tagging me and dozens of our extended family members and mutual friends. She claimed I was suffering from severe post-operative delirium. She painted a picture of a worried, loving mother thousands of miles away, desperately trying to help her mentally unwell daughter who had suffered a psychological break. She asked for prayers, she asked for privacy. She was establishing a narrative to discredit me, hoping the social pressure would force me to unlock the accounts and apologize for my erratic behavior. It was a classic incompetence gambit. Paint the target as unstable to invalidate their decisions. I read her post twice, I didn't comment, I didn't defend myself. Engaging with manipulation only validates it. Instead, I forwarded the post to Marcus. I instructed him to draft a cold, uncompromising cease and desist letter. I didn't want any emotional language. I wanted pure legal force. I wanted them to understand that the dynamic had permanently shifted from a familial obligation to a hostile corporate negotiation. Marcus drafted a 20-page document detailing their unauthorized financial extractions, Jason's attempted cyber theft of my $85,000 bonus, and the legal consequences of their ongoing defamation campaign. We didn't mail it to their home. We sent it directly to the concierge at their luxury resort with strict instructions to deliver it to Brenda's suite on a silver platter. They were expecting a tearful phone call, a desperate plea for their love, or an angry outburst they could use as further proof of my instability. Instead, they received a legally binding declaration of war served alongside their morning room service. I received a frantic text from Jason an hour later. "You cannot do this, Elena. Mom is having a panic attack." "We are family." I read the message, my heart rate steady. I typed my response with deliberate precision. "We are not family. We are former business associates, and your employment has been terminated. Do not contact me again." I blocked his number. They weren't shocked by what they had done to me. They were absolutely shocked that I had stopped playing along. The narrative of the mentally unwell daughter collapsed the moment they read the clinical, methodical language of my attorney's letter. They realized they were no longer dealing with the sister they could bully or the daughter they could manipulate. They were dealing with a sovereign entity, and their accounts were frozen. The next morning, Marcus walked into my hospital room. He was carrying a thick manila folder, and his usual calm demeanor was replaced by a rigid, professional intensity. He sat in the chair beside my bed and placed the folder on my tray table. He had completed the legal audit of my assets, but he had uncovered something far more sinister than unauthorized credit card usage or Jason's attempted wire fraud. Marcus opened the file and handed me a copy of a court docket. While I was under anesthesia, while the surgeons were literally operating on my vital organs, my family had filed an emergency petition in the county court. They had attempted to establish a legal guardianship over me. I read the documents, the clinical terminology washing over me. Brenda and Jason had submitted fraudulent affidavits claiming I was mentally incapacitated and unfit to manage my own affairs. They had requested full conservatorship over my medical decisions, my financial estate, and, most importantly, my corporate entities. They had even bribed an unscrupulous doctor to sign off on a falsified psychiatric evaluation, claiming I was in a vegetative state. It was a calculated scheme designed to bypass my legal defenses while I was sedated. They weren't just trying to steal my performance bonus. They were attempting to seize my entire professional identity. They wanted legal control over my software patents, my royalty routing protocols, and my ongoing intellectual property rights. If the judge had granted the emergency petition, they could have legally liquidated my entire life's work, transferring my patents to Jason's failing technology startup, and draining my accounts under the guise of managing my care. It was a perfectly timed execution. They assumed I would be incapacitated for weeks, giving them a clear window to bypass my security and take absolute control. This was no longer a story about family entitlement or financial dependency. This was calculated, premeditated criminal fraud. They had weaponized the legal system to try and erase my autonomy. I stared at the signature on the affidavit. Brenda's looping cursive. Jason's sharp scrawl. They had signed these documents right before boarding their first-class flight to St. Bart's. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the cold reality of their betrayal settle into my bones. Any lingering trace of familial duty evaporated. The family drama had officially escalated into a criminal fraud case. I looked up at Marcus. He was waiting for my instruction. "What is our countermeasure?" I asked. Marcus outlined the strategy. Because I was awake, lucid, and legally competent, their petition was instantly void. But the act of filing it with fraudulent intent was a felony. We had the evidence. We had the timestamps. We had Jason's digital footprint trying to access the $85,000. "We don't just defend against this Elena," Marcus said. "We prosecute. Do it," I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. "I want the fraud charges filed immediately. I want the district attorney notified. And Marcus, I want to initiate the final structural change we discussed." Marcus nodded, a grim smile playing on his lips. The power dynamic hadn't just flipped, it had become a judicial execution. They had tried to steal my sovereignty, my mind, and my future. They had dug a grave for my independence, but they were the ones who were going to fall into it. The retaliation was no longer about cutting off their allowance. It was about dismantling their entire existence. The execution of my final judgment was surgical and uncompromising. The 4-bedroom townhouse that Brenda, Jason, and Linda lived in, the one with the imported marble countertops and the custom landscaping, was not their house. It was my house. I had purchased it 5 years ago in my name, allowing them to live there rent-free under a verbal agreement that they had long since violated. While they were scrambling to find a way back from St. Bart's, desperately maxing out their remaining low-limit credit cards to buy economy tickets home, Marcus and I executed the sovereign eviction. I didn't give them a simple 30-day notice. I didn't file for a standard lengthy eviction process. Instead, Marcus successfully petitioned for an emergency possession order based on the documented evidence of their criminal fraud and embezzlement. The court granted us immediate possession, bypassing the usual tenant protection delays due to their status as felons in the act of committing a crime. Because the house was legally mine, and because I had recently transferred it into a corporate trust for security purposes, I simply authorized an immediate cash-only sale to a real estate investment firm that specialized in rapid acquisitions. Because I had pre-signed a power of attorney for corporate liquidations years ago for this specific trust, the firm was able to fast-track the title transfer. It was an as-is cash transaction that bypassed the traditional real estate market. The firm purchased the property fully furnished, every designer sofa I had paid for, every luxury appliance I had subsidized, became the property of the new owners. The sale closed in 48 hours. By the time my family landed at the airport, their home was legally occupied by strangers. They took a taxi from the airport, their luggage crammed into the trunk, completely unaware of the structural collapse of their reality. They were broke, but desperation is a powerful motivator. I later learned they had pawned their high-end watches and designer jewelry at local shops in St. Bart's just to scrap together enough cash for economy tickets and a taxi ride to my building. According to the security footage Marcus later reviewed, they walked up to the front door of the townhouse and found their keys didn't work. They looked through the windows and saw a staging team removing Brenda's beloved dining table. They looked through the windows and saw a liquidation crew tossing Brenda's beloved mahogany dining table and designer chairs onto a flatbed truck. The company wasn't interested in maintaining their lifestyle. They were clearing the house for a complete renovation. The panic must have been absolute. They had no money, no home, and no access to their former lives. 2 hours later, they arrived at my secure apartment building. They bypassed the lobby concierge, but the security team intercepted them near the elevators. I was sitting at my kitchen island, sipping a cup of black coffee, watching them through the security feed. I did not panic. I simply pressed a button on my phone. The elevator doors opened, and 2 uniformed police officers stepped out into the lobby to meet them. I had provided them with the active felony warrant for the fraudulent guardianship petition and a court-issued restraining order. They weren't there for a domestic dispute, they were there to make an arrest. Marcus had coordinated with the building management and local law enforcement to ensure that only authorized residents could reach my floor, preventing any security escalation in the hallways. I unlocked my door and stepped into the hallway. Brenda was hysterical, her vacation tan contrasting sharply with her pale, panicked face. "Elena, what have you done? There are people in our house!" she screamed. "That is not your house," I stated, my voice echoing coldly in the corridor. "It is a corporate asset that has been liquidated." Jason lunged forward, but the police officers intercepted him, pinning him against the wall. "You are crazy! You cannot do this to us!" he yelled. "The district attorney disagrees," I said. "You have been served with criminal fraud charges for your fraudulent guardianship petition. You are officially trespassing." Brenda fell to her knees, sobbing, begging for me to listen, begging for the daughter she had tried to legally erase. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no anger, just the quiet hum of a closed transaction. "This is not revenge," I said, looking into her terrified eyes. "This is accounting. The balance is settled." I stepped back inside my apartment, closed the heavy oak door, and locked it. My final goodbye was delivered in silence. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in the beauty of silence. The legal fallout hit my family with the force of a freight train. Jason and Brenda were formally indicted on felony fraud charges for the falsified guardianship documents. With no access to my funds, they were forced to rely on court-appointed public defenders, navigating a justice system they had always believed was meant for other people. Aunt Linda, having no assets of her own, moved into a cheap motel on the outskirts of the city, taking night shifts at a local diner to survive. The country club memberships were publicly revoked, the luxury cars were repossessed. The facade of their wealthy, privileged lives shattered completely, leaving only the stark, ugly reality of their incompetence. I did not attend their preliminary hearings. I did not read the desperate, handwritten letters they sent from the county jail begging for a financial settlement. I remained completely detached, watching the consequences of their actions unfold from a safe, clinical distance. I moved forward with my life. I recovered fully from my surgery, my physical strength returning just as my financial and professional empires continued to expand. My software patents secured massive new enterprise contracts, and my ghost accounts grew exponentially. But more importantly, my mind was free. I often reflect on the fundamental difference between sovereignty versus revenge. Revenge is an emotional reaction. It is loud, messy, and inherently tied to the desire to inflict pain. It keeps you connected to the very people who hurt you, eternally bound by a shared cycle of anger and resentment. Sovereignty, however, is a structural state of being. It is the quiet, methodical removal of toxic elements from your ecosystem. I didn't destroy my family out of spite. I simply removed my financial infrastructure and let the gravity of their own choices pull them under. I allowed them to experience the reality they had built. I calculated the cost of that townhouse, the hundreds of thousands of dollars I had poured into their bottomless pit of entitlement, and I compared it to the cost of my peace. The peace won. And it wasn't even a close margin. I've come to realize that holding on to toxic people out of an outdated sense of obligation is a profound betrayal of yourself. We are conditioned to believe that blood is an unbreakable bond, that we must endure systematic abuse because of a shared last name or childhood history. But I've learned that forgiveness isn't always for the other person. Sometimes it's the only way to set yourself free. I didn't forgive them by welcoming them back into my life. I forgave them by walking away, by releasing the heavy burden of trying to save people who were determined to drown me. Now, my life is quiet, my assets are secure, and my future belongs entirely to me. If you enjoyed this comeback story, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear that it's okay to put yourself first. What would you do in Elena's shoes? Let's talk in the comments.